Dave, we're going to start out a little different this week. I'm going to start by singing a song. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Thomas. Happy birthday to you.
So let's be clear. It's not my birthday. You're not singing that to me.
Nope.
And it's not your birthday.
Nope.
You're not singing to you, Thomas.
Nope. I am singing to Thomas Jefferson.
Okay.
We're recording this podcast on the week of his birthday, April 13th, 1743.
Okay.
So to give a little context there, he's born in 1743. Declaration of Independence is 1776. He was only 23 years old.
Yep.
Think about what you were doing when you were 23. I think about what I was doing when I was 23. This guy writes the draft of the Declaration of Independence.
Well, you know why he was able to. He didn't have Netflix to distract him. Although neither did we.
That's right. That's right.
I did have my original Nintendo though.
Nor did he have social media,
right,
or Clubhouse, right? So
this is true.
It's Jefferson's birthday, and boy howdy, I'm gonna make an assertion. We need the principles of Jefferson more right now than anytime, certainly anytime in modern history, maybe anytime in all of American history, because, I mean, look around, look what's going on. Have you seen the people in Minnesota again? You know, there was a shooting involving a police officer and a young black man. There are still details to be known about what exactly happened. It is looking, from what I've seen, it looks like it was an accident. By everything I've read and seen, it seems like this police officer thought she was discharging her taser,
right?
And instead she discharges her gun. I don't know how.
That whole thing is a little weird to me.
It is.
I
agree.
Don't quite know how that happens.
I agree. And the results are almost predictable. People are looting stores, rioting, and as you and I have pointed out before, when government agents abuse power, the solution is to take some power away from government agents, not go steal private property and burn down businesses.
You say that. I don't know why. I didn't think about this until just this moment.
Yeah.
But do we know what department she was with? Was she part of the municipal police department, or was she part of the county police department?
That I don't know.
I just wonder, why aren't they out protesting in front of the person who put that woman in that position, right?
Yeah.
If it's municipal, that means the mayor,
right,
hired a police chief.
Right.
And the police chief
hired her.
Yeah. Why are you burning down stores? Why are you destroying private property? Why are you hurting other private citizens?
The one scene I saw, they were breaking in like a T-Mobile store. They were stealing cell phones. What does that have to do with this government bureaucrat?
Right.
And I don't know anything about her. I don't know how capable or the opposite she has been as a police officer. I don't know. But if that's your problem, if you have a problem with what she did, right, what does that have to do with cell phones inside a T-Mobile store?
And go protest the mayor.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And and all of this, of course, is being framed as this is modern woke America. Mm-hmm. Woke progressivism. I actually think people who claim to be woke are quite sleepy, that their eyes really are closed to some very important things.
Yes.
But this is a popular term, and where it really leads, wokeism, for those who don't know, it consists of progressives who say they've just now realized, their eyes are open to the fact that everything about this country, and really everything that they thought was good, really is racist, is structural, institutionalized racism, is injustice, is bad, is white.
Right.
That so much of what many people think is true and good and right is really white.
Right.
And so there's this push against anything white. And when progressives say reject whiteness, they don't mean merely the color of skin. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll see people with white, pasty skin start coloring their skin dark. I don't know.
Well, but that's racist too.
Right, that's blackface, but maybe it requires something like that. I don't know. But I think what they're really emphasizing is a white attitude, a white frame of mind, a white way of thinking. And that sort of brings us to the guy whose birthday it is this week. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson. Here is one fact about Jefferson that has never been challenged, never been disputed, never been argued. He was pasty white. Everybody acknowledges and agrees this guy had pasty white skin, very light, pale white skin. His critics, his fans all agree that. So when we look
he was a bit of a poet who liked to sit indoors and sit and write. And writing at that time wasn't sitting on your phone or sitting on your computer. It was calligraphy, and he was sitting indoors and writing.
He not only sat indoors and wrote, he sat indoors and designed writing desks. He designed his own very elaborate little writing desks that some of them were portable, so he could fold them up and pack them up and take them with him, right? And they had little cubbies and little drawers for all of his writing instruments.
Things that would make Ben Franklin proud.
Yeah, absolutely. He and Franklin had that in common. My lifestyle is very different than Jefferson. I love Jefferson's ideas, but I also love to be outside and be physical whenever I can. Whereas Jefferson, he spent a lot of time in the shade,
right,
a lot of time indoors. And so, it's really interesting because Jefferson, the ideas of Jefferson, which are inseparable from the American idea, the ideas of Jefferson inform and help shape what we call the American idea within the Vino Veritas Society, the thing that we are trying to uphold and protect and guard against the threats of progressivism. And those ideas of Jefferson's are ideas that solve the problem of tribalism, move us a regime or a society based upon the ideas of Jefferson is a non-tribal society. And what I mean by that is these ideas are meant to bring people together from wildly different backgrounds, even from different parts of the earth. Mm-hmm. I mean, different, ethnic and national backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, people who look different from each other, possibly speak differently from each other. Jefferson held out this hope that there are certain key foundational, self-evident moral and political truths that people from different backgrounds can agree on and live together within a regime and make sure that everyone is secure in their liberty and their property as fellow citizens, rather than engaging in the kind of tribal conflict and war that really stretches back through all the annals of human history.
And think about what that tribalism actually resulted in throughout human history, all the way up until into the early 19th century. Tribalism at its core was what led to slavery.
Absolutely.
Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you cannot separate the idea of tribalism from the idea of slavery. Slavery comes out of you have two tribes, mm-hmm, and one goes and conquers another tribe. Yep. And at first they started killing all of the members of the other tribe because they wanted their food or they wanted their shelter or they wanted their spears or whatever it might have been.
Right.
And then somebody once says, wait a minute. Let's not go kill them. Let's enslave them. Mm-hmm. And now we get free labor. Mm-hmm. Now we get free women.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you actually had that at one point in time. Yes. I don't want to sugarcoat that at all. So this idea of tribalism that Jefferson intentionally was trying to get away from was at its core created one of the most ruthless and horrific institutions in world history.
You're right. Slavery springs from the distinction between us and them.
Right.
We have our tribe. That's another different tribe, a foreign tribe over there. Maybe it's just a neighboring city, but still, it's someone different. It's a different group. Let's go make war on them, take their stuff, including their people, and enslave them.
I hope nobody thinks that tribalism is gone from the world today.
Mm-hmm.
And I really hope people think about that when they realize how tribalistic the United States is fast becoming.
That's right. And I'm suggesting that tribalism is inseparable from wokeism, from being a woke progressive. It requires you to think tribal. There are different. There's a group over there with one skin color, and I'm a woke progressive. So I have to reject everything they say and adopt whatever is said in my tribe or along my racial lines. And it is leading to these terrible divisions that are deepening. They're becoming increasingly violent. And so I think it's an important time right now to revisit the ideas of Thomas Jefferson, again, which are part of the American idea. And so I thought we'd do a little game. We're going to turn the Vino Veritas Society podcast into a game show for today.
Okay, so I'm a contestant. Apparently,
you are a contestant.
I am the sole contestant.
That's right.
Here's the nice thing. If I was a progressive, I feel really good because I'd be guaranteed to win.
That's right. Think of this as kind of an affirmative action appointment, okay?
Okay.
So what we're going to do, I have jotted down some of the key ideas that were central to the political thought, the moral thought of Thomas Jefferson.
Okay.
And I want to ask you, which of these is a white idea? Our fellow citizens who are woke progressives, they tell us we should reject whiteness. Coca-Cola, the company, tells us we should reject whiteness. United Airlines is now telling us we should reject whiteness. This is a growing movement within, not just among progressive activists and progressive intellectuals, but even within progressive business circles, this idea of rejecting whiteness and everything included. So I'm gonna go through some of these key ideas,
okay,
and I'm gonna ask you which ones are white and should be rejected by non-white woke progressives. And the very first one, this is kind of a big one. This is really important to the entire career and intellectual life of Thomas Jefferson.
You couldn't give me a softball on the first one?
No, this one's going to be a big one. The idea of reason, that there is such a thing as reason, that the human mind is capable of reasoning and it can discover truth. When Jefferson was an old man, so we mentioned he was born April 13th, 1743. His death is somewhat famous because he died on July 4th. This is no joke. He actually died on the and it wasn't just July 4th. It was July 4th, 1826. That is precisely 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence. Right, July 4th, 1776 to July 4th, 1826, and his old, sometimes friend, sometimes enemy, then friend again,
say that.
John Adams, died on the same day. I mean, come on, this is too much, right?
Yep.
This is how could this happen? And remember, John Adams was on that original commission, that committee of five to produce the Declaration, and John Adams made some important edits to Jefferson's rough draft. So they both die July 4th, 1826. And just before then, Jefferson was invited to come to a big public event celebrating the Independence Day and, on the 4th of July, and they wanted him to give a talk about the Declaration. And he was old and sick and feeble. He couldn't go. But he wrote this beautiful letter to Roger Waitman, which is the guy who was helping to organize this event. And in that letter, and I recommend our listeners go look it up, Jefferson to Roger Waitman in 1826, Jefferson is explaining his purpose in writing the Declaration of Independence, what he meant the Declaration to be. And as he's explaining that, he said, I hope it is to everyone in the world a signal to burst the chains of monkish ignorance and superstition, and that reasoning minds around the world will take these ideas, will understand these ideas, and embrace the idea of individual liberty and self-government, rather than living in superstition and ignorance. That was Jefferson's notion of the importance of reason. Only reasoning people can be truly free people. Is that a white idea? Is that an idea progressives should reject?
Obviously, just answer the question and we can move on. I'm going to play a little Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Okay.
Do you remember the show?
Oh, yeah.
Regis Philbin and everything else. And these
you
guys
call someone on a lifeline?
I don't need a lifeline on this one. Okay. But I have a feeling you're going to get a little more tricky, and I might. You talk through all the answers, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk through this for a minute. Let's reason our way to the answer. We have, through the Vino Veritas Society, through talking about the American idea, we have talked about the Aristotle's idea of the godlike, the reason free of passion. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about the animal instincts, the appetites. Mm-hmm. And that as human beings, we have the distinct, unique capability to balance the two out.
And we have them both.
And we have them both, right? So that we have animal instincts, mm-hmm. we have godlike reason, mm-hmm. and our objective, or the best life for us, is to know when to allow our appetites to exist, to take hold of us when appropriate.
Yeah, when to follow them.
Right.
Yeah.
But also understand that we have to use reason to get there.
Now, wait a minute. Are you saying if I'm in Minnesota right now and I feel really angry and I want to break the window of a T-Mobile store and steal a phone because I have strong feelings about it, that I should use my reason to control my emotions and control my actions?
Yes. You should not use your appetite. You should not use your instincts to go your appetite for a phone.
Right. A free phone.
Yeah. The argument to say that is a white argument, mm-hmm. for somebody to say that is a white argument,
right.
I'm going to go back to last week's podcast. That is a racist comment. To argue that for generations, Americans believed that we could use our reason to overcome our animal instincts, our animal appetites, our beastly appetites. Mm-hmm. We could use reason. And to say that's a white idea means that black people are animals, that black and brown people are animals, that they have no ability to reason. They don't have the mental acuity, the mental capacity to actually accomplish that.
Well, I suppose another angle would be maybe they're suggesting black people with black skin or brown skin have only reason and they have no appetites or instincts at all. Maybe they're godly beings. But either way, they're denying the essential human nature of people with dark colored skin.
To say that would mean, based on Aristotle's definition at the very least, to say that they're saying that those people aren't human.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they're not entitled to the same rights and to equal rights and everything else. So the reality is, to claim that is a white idea, that we must use reason, goes back to last week's podcast. That to me is a purely, not only is that wrong, it is a purely racist argument.
Yeah. It really raises the question whether there's anything important that all human beings share in common. I mean, that was Aristotle, right? He's trying to understand human nature.
Right.
So he did not say what I'm about to describe are features of white human beings or brown human beings or black human beings. He said these are features of human beings. All human beings have these features. And, maybe we could make some headway with our woke progressive friends, possibly. Maybe if we started with something a little more simple and a little more obvious, such as the fact that all human beings who don't suffer some kind of either deformation or terrible accident, they have hands. And a human hand is very interesting in that we have these opposable thumbs.
Right.
A healthy, functioning hand should be able to grab onto something, should be able to grab a ball. If your hand cannot grab onto something, that's like, right? Ask any physician, doctor, I can't grab anything with my hand. What's the first thing the doctor's going to think? There might be a problem with your hand. Right. We might need to investigate what is because a human hand should be able to grab things. In the same way that all human hands should be able to grab something. And if a thumb doesn't work or fingers don't work, that means there's a problem. There's a standard of health there that we're talking about. We're saying all human beings should have two hands and they should be able to grab something. And if your hand can't, we're going to see if we can figure out the problem, maybe, so we can restore that functionality to your hand. Aristotle looked at the soul in the exact same way and said, just like all human beings should have two hands, should have 2 feet, they should be able to stand up and walk, they should be able to do these things, so too they will feel desires and hungers for various things, food, sleep, sex, and they can think about their own appetites and their desires, and they can make rational judgments whether that is a wise thing to follow your appetite or not. You might be looking at a highly poisonous fruit that looks beautiful, And you might be, your eyes and your stomach might be tempted to eat it until you do a little bit of research and find out, oh, that's a very poisonous fruit. I actually shouldn't eat that.
I saw Snow White. I know what you're talking about.
That's right. All right. So reason, we're going to suggest, we're being very politically incorrect here today, Dave. We are suggesting that reason, the idea of reason, is not a white idea. It's an idea. It's a human idea. It applies to all humans. So let's try another one here.
So if saying that's not white is politically correct, but it's also saying that it's not, that I'm not going to be racist in my views of other people, I'm okay with not being politically correct.
Okay. So let's try. This is another. Again, these are ideas that were key, central, core to Jefferson's intellectual career.
Sure.
These are ideas that Jefferson came back to over and over and over. He wrote about them, talked about them in many different contexts. The second one, this is a big one. This is in Jefferson's own understanding of his influence on the world, his career, his accomplishments. He ranks this up right at the top. This is one of the three things he wanted etched on his own grave. This is a guy, remember, he was elected twice president of the United States in the election of 1800 and 1804. He didn't think being president was important enough to put that on his tombstone. He has this big obelisk, this big tall thing. He didn't want that on there. What he wanted to be remembered for at his gravesite was founder of the University of Virginia, because he thought the idea of education, because he believed in reason so much, he thought education was absolutely critical for the fate of freedom.
Think he would take that off today?
Yeah, probably, if he saw what had become to his.
We know quite a few Virginia grads.
Yeah,
I think they'd all agree he'd probably want that off there.
It's not a Jeffersonian institution anymore. But that was one of the things he wanted to be remembered for, founding the University of Virginia. And he, and along with his friend Madison, they did most of the bulwark there in creating that school. The second thing, he wanted to be remembered for authoring the Declaration of Independence, which is sort of an interesting thing because he did write the draft, and then there were a number of revisions and edits. I mean, he was really unhappy by the end of the process, as any author is, right? Once editors get involved.
Yeah, you know nothing about that.
Yeah. And then finally, and this brings us to the number 2 point, he authored by himself the Virginia Statute of Religious Liberty.
Okay.
And that statute, it's beautiful, by the way. It's kind of a model of how a law should be written. I'm going to encourage our listeners to quickly Google the Virginia Statute for Religious Liberty. I know it's at the Avalon website, many other historical sites that have historical documents. It's very short. You can read it in 4 or 5 minutes.
A bill that's not 5,000 pages.
That's right. It's very brief.
That you can read before you pass it.
That's right. And Jefferson thinks this is a crowning achievement in his career. And I actually agree with him. I think he's right. Because prior to the American founding, number one, there had never been a regime of full-blown religious liberty. And I'm not even talking here about religious toleration. That's something. Toleration is when a controlling political class allows certain religious minority groups to worship the way they want to worship for a period of time. But those minority groups, they're really at the whim of the controlling political class. They can take that away. I'm talking about a regime that recognizes the full-blown natural right to worship freely, however or to not worship at all, not to go to church. That had never existed, and more for many centuries prior to the American Revolution. If you look at European history, what was going on there, it is century after century after century of terrible, bloody wars of religious persecution.
Little thing called the Inquisition.
That's right. That's very much right. You have effectively, I'm painting with a broad stroke, but there's a lot of truth to this. It's Christians persecuting Christians because they don't belong to the right church, or they've broken away from a church, or they believe in transubstantiation, or they don't believe in transubstantiation. And of course, along the way, you have fights between Christians and Muslims. You have Protestants and Catholics persecuting Jews. It's a bloody mess across Europe. And of course, Europe is ruled by kings. Most kings claim their authority from God.
Right.
And so the churches were right in the middle of all these big political controversies. The churches were basically the power brokers who ordained. They said who the legitimate king was because they're the church.
Sure.
So, apparently the bishops and the cardinals and the other priestly types get a message from God as to who is the real legitimate king and who is not. And so who was controlling the churches and making people attend those churches and believe the doctrines promoted? All of this had huge political ramifications. And it led to ceaseless fighting and conflict. To the best of my knowledge, nobody has really assembled any kind of accurate death totals from the medieval European wars of religion. If I'm mistaken, in fact, I'm going to ask if any of our listeners know of some pretty good, accurate numbers. I'd be interested to see them. It's in the millions.
And it's in the millions at a time when the world's population wasn't 7 billion
That's
people,
right. That's right.
When you put that into today's context, we're talking in the tens of millions.
That's right. And that was not even right. We're talking in the medieval world. This is prior to modern technology, prior to modern medical technology. Life was short and nasty and brutish, as Thomas Hobbes said. I mean, it was these plagues would sweep through and just destroy entire continents of human populations. So life was really hard. And on top of that, you have these brutal wars of religion. And from Jefferson's point of view, he thinks the most important, most pressing goal, he hated slavery, and he certainly wanted to see an end to slavery. He thought solving the problem of religious persecution was more important. It was a bigger priority.
Because it was tribalistic at
Very
nature.
tribal. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And so in his Virginia Statute for Religious Liberty, he has a beautiful line in there where he said, our civil liberties as fellow citizens, our civil liberties should depend on our religious opinions no more than our opinions on physics or geometry or mathematics. Maybe you're a staunch believer of Euclidean geometry, or maybe you've been kind of radical and you're dabbling in modern non-Euclidean geometry.
Is that a thing?
It is actually a thing. It's one of my subfields is when I was majoring in mathematics as an undergraduate, non-Euclidean geometry. But whatever your views are on geometry, it doesn't affect your civil rights, right? Laws should still protect your life, your liberty, your property. You should be able to vote. You should be able to run for office. You should have a jury trial if you're accused of a crime, regardless of what you think about mathematics or geometry or physics. And the same thing regardless of what you think about religion or what you think about God, which church you belong to. Maybe you don't belong to any church. Your civil rights shouldn't depend on that. And so this idea of religious liberty, it makes possible for the first time in human history where you actually can have, and we do have, streets of houses, and there can be a Catholic, and there can be a Protestant, and there can be a Jew, and there can be an atheist living as neighbors, and they can be friends with each other because the religious belief of each one in no way affects the civil rights or the civil liberties of their neighbors. Sure. And so nobody has to force anyone to go to a certain church or hold certain religious tenets. So that idea of religious liberty is central to Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
Our freedom, our property should be protected regardless of our religious views. Is that a white idea?
It's the opposite of a white idea. I'm going to give a little history here from a Jewish perspective. Mm-hmm. You talked about the difference between tolerated and actually granted those rights, granted that you are a citizen and you have all the same rights as everybody else. Throughout much of the last 2,000 years before the United States, through really Napoleon, the Jews were tolerated in certain circumstances.
Yeah, sometimes, some places.
They were either charged with you're the reason the Black Plague happened and we're going to kill you all, or we're going to tolerate you. In certain circumstances, that toleration was we're going to tolerate you by not killing you, but you're still going to be slaves.
Right.
You're definitely not going to have property rights. You're definitely not going to have freedom to practice your religion. But the big example that if you go back about 1,000 years ago was Charlemagne, a little more than 1,000 years ago. Charlemagne joins the Holy Roman Empire, who says, okay, you're now part of the Holy Roman Empire. You got to give us all your money.
Yep.
I got that money through spoils of war long before I was part of the church. You didn't help me with that. That's mine.
Right.
And they said, yeah, but if you want to be part of the church, you have to do that. So what did he do? He went and enslaved a bunch of Jews, and he said, you're going to be my bank, and you're going to be in charge of doing loans and usury laws and all of that kind of stuff that the church would have frowned upon him on.
Right.
He says, you're my slaves. You take my money, I'm going to kill you. But I'm going to let you live as long as you do that. That's toleration. And then up through Napoleon's time, that was the first time. Okay, you can go to school. We're actually going to let you go get an education.
There's a model. There's really a natural model for this notion of toleration. The relationship between parents and children, right? Children, a small child, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, does not have any intrinsic right to do whatever he or she wants to do. Because a 3-year-old kid hasn't developed his reason.
Right.
He can't really make his own decisions, can't make them wisely. And therefore, what does a 3-year-old do? Whatever his parents tolerate or allow him to do.
Let
right?
him get away with.
But at any moment, the parents have the rightful authority to rein that in. And that's really what you're talking about with adults, large population of adult human beings living as if they're children.
And I think there is this common misconception today that everybody just says, oh, all Jews are white, right? You even get to this point of like most depictions of Jesus are white.
I was just going to say, hang on, Dave. You mean Jesus didn't look like in the new generation of Star Wars, the trainer of Anakin, Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't look like that?
No. So throughout the American history, in the early days of America, we don't hear a whole lot about the relationship. It wasn't like Jefferson and Washington had the kind of relationship that Hamilton and Washington had. Right?
Oh, very true.
Hamilton and Washington were really close. Jefferson and Washington coexisted. They agreed on a lot, I'm sure, and I'm sure they had some very in-depth debates and discussions about things. But Jefferson wasn't necessarily didn't have the hero worship of George Washington that an Alexander Hamilton had. But the one thing there were two real examples when you talk about religious liberty that Jefferson really zeroed in on things that Washington did. One was, and we've talked about it, Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation at Rhode Island.
Yeah.
I think that really resonated with Jefferson when you read some of the things Jefferson talked about and wrote about.
Yep.
That idea of religious
liberty. And this was
liberty.
Washington.
Right.
In his capacity as president, so not just merely a private citizen, the president of the United States, first time in history, a chief executive officer of a sovereign regime sends a greeting to a group of fellow citizens who are Jewish and recognizes them as full-blown equal citizens with all the same rights that chief executive has.
And then the other one is with the Indian tribes, the 5 tribes. Washington negotiates this deal with the 5 tribes saying, we are going to allow you to continue your religious practices, your personal spiritual beliefs,
right,
and we're going to make all of this work. And Jefferson takes it that next step and actually negotiates it into law. It wasn't until after Jefferson dies in 1826 that Andrew Jackson came along and said, "Yeah, I don't think I'm okay with that."
Yep.
So and that's when a lot of these things happen. So we see those examples of clearly groups of people who were not white. Where Jefferson is saying, we recognize your right. So in those two examples, it is clearly not a white idea to say we have religious liberty.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Let's move on to number 3.
Okay.
These things used to be within the context of American politics. I think all these things used to be rather non-controversial, but in our world of progressive wokeism. I'm never sure if I should say progressive wokeism or woke progressivism. I'm sure somebody has a guide to this.
We could probably spend an entire podcast just debating the merits of both of those two.
But all these core ideas have become controversial in the world of woke progressivism. Here's number 3. This again was this was a big part of Jefferson's thinking about the world. The idea of free speech, and he fully recognized free speech is going to include a lot of stupid speech, ugly speech, offensive speech, embracing this idea of free human beings are free to speak the way they want to speak. And unless they positively harm someone, of course he's in favor of laws for libel and if I falsely say about you, you're a dishonest businessman. Don't do business with Dave. He rips people off. When you don't rip people off, I've caused damage there. You should be able to sue me. I should have to make you whole for that. But as long as I'm not positively harming someone, a free person should be able to say whatever they want to say, no matter how stupid, how uninformed it is.
I think of the old childhood rhyme. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
That's it. And that's basically Jefferson's position on free speech. We see in a couple of places in his first inaugural address, he described, and that's another document people should go look up. Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural address. He delivers that on March 4th, 1801, as he's being sworn into office. And it's very short. Think of inaugural addresses today. Think of Joe Biden droning on and on and on for an hour and a half. That Jefferson's inaugural address, I believe it's 4 paragraphs. It's very short. And he talks in there he's talking about people who stand in public and espouse wrong ideas, bad ideas, hurtful ideas. And he says of them, let them stand. They'll be like monuments of the safety with which we can tolerate erroneous opinions as long as reason and speech are free to combat it. Anybody's free to say anything, even wrong things. They're free to say that as long as the people around are free to say, no, that's wrong, and let me explain why it's wrong for this, and this reason. Because this is how reason operates, through free speech, right? You say something, I think about it, and then I respond to what you say. Maybe I challenge something. You listen to what I say and respond to me. It's that back and forth of free speech by which we try to identify errors in our thinking and try to move closer to what's the truth. Right. And so this notion of free speech, free people should speak freely. That is core to Jefferson's life. This comes back again and this is really curious because this is when John Adams is president. Remember, Adams is president he gets elected 96. In 96 until Jefferson gets elected in the election of 1800. And Jefferson, here's a little piece people tend to forget. Tom Jefferson is his vice president. Yeah. This is before the amendment, the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. And Jefferson had received the second greatest number of electoral votes. And under the original Constitution, whoever got the most, and a majority, was the president. Whoever got the second most would be the vice president. So Thomas Jefferson, who loathes John Adams, is Adams' vice president. And Adams and the Federalists in Congress pass the Alien and Sedition laws. And they effectively make it a crime to criticize the government, to publish things. It's very much a limit on speech. And so Jefferson is out authoring, usually under pseudonyms or anonymously. He helps write the Kentucky resolutions and the Virginia resolutions, pushing back against these measures, defending the idea of free speech, which includes ugly, false, stupid speech. Is that a white idea? Free speech?
No. So this is probably a more complicated no than we probably even have time to get into today, and we could go on and on about it. I want to make a couple of points. One, the reality of quality, intellectual, thoughtful debate where people are hearing each other and actually having those conversations is the only way you get past the ideas of racism. I'll never forget, my mother once told me a story about it was the first time she had left New York.
Okay.
And this is 60 years ago plus. And in New York, there's a lot of Jewish people. And she leaves New York. And she met somebody, and she was the first Jewish person they ever met. And they looked her square in the eye, dead serious, and said, "Where are your horns?"
Right.
Truly believed that Jewish people had horns.
Yeah.
And I've heard that time and time again. I think that was even a comment in the movie Jojo Rabbit.
Yes, it was.
So
the little boy asked her, "Where are your horns?"
Right.
She said, "I'm not old enough. Mine haven't started to come in yet."
And we've had our whole conversation about that movie. You liked it a lot more than I did, but another story. Having those open dialogues, having those open conversations, knowing who has racist ideas and being able to engage them, so long as they can't hurt you, so long as they don't have legalized use of force, i.e. government, to hurt you, it's not that big a deal.
You just said something quite radical in our world today. If I want to make sure I understand you correctly, I think you're suggesting that racist speech, real racist, meaning racial slurs, making fun of groups of people based on the color of their skin or some other characteristic, is not that great of a wrong relative to other possible wrongs.
Now let's put that in context.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's not wrong. And you're right. It's not that great of a wrong. That doesn't mean I want to go do business with the person.
Right.
That doesn't mean I want to be their best friend.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I ever want to talk to them again. But it's not the other side of it is where it gets more dangerous. And I think back to, there is a clear, distinct difference between somebody saying something racist and the activities of the Democratic Party from the early 1800s through, even into past the Civil War, right? Slavery, beatings, rape, murder, all of these things.
Jim Crow, terrorism, Ku Klux Klan.
All of these things that were a violation that we said in the very beginning. They are human beings. You violated their natural rights. That is never, ever, ever, ever acceptable.
Right.
No question, no comment, period, the end.
And
it is not acceptable.
I'll add on to that, where you have large numbers of people making racial slurs, racial comments, it is probably creating an environment where actual racial injustice becomes more likely. I think that makes sense. And still it stands that a racist statement in itself is not a violation of anyone else's rights. It's not an injustice against them. It's rude. And I agree with you. I don't want to hang out with someone who talks like that. But they haven't actually violated anybody else's rights.
And it goes in every direction. I don't care what race you are, what religion you are, what gender you are, anything else. We have seemingly gotten to a point where that is acceptable if you say it about one person, but it's not acceptable if you say it about another. It's either acceptable or it's not. And at the end of the day, free speech is too important because, like you said, that's how we get past a lot of these things. Hiding behind laws and things like that, saying you can't say that. I would rather know who the people are who think less of me. So I don't do business with them. So I don't invest my time and my energy with them rather than have them pretending because they're afraid of getting thrown in jail or being kicked off Facebook or whatever else for it.
I'll add a story that I think helps to demonstrate the importance of free speech. You know who did the most to discredit the Ku Klux Klan? The Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan, in its origins, they were very much a secret society. They were hidden. Most people didn't see the Klan until they showed up at your house at midnight, right? And you knew you had a problem. If you look out your window at midnight and here's 100 guys coming riding on horses with white hoods and the burning torches and all that, you got a problem on your a very serious, deadly problem. And that's when the Ku Klux Klan was the most formidable because they were the most terrorizing. Over the decades, the Ku Klux Klan decided to sort of come out of the closet. They wanted to be quite public. And they started talking. And then they wanted to march in parades and hand out their literature. And their freedom of speech did more to discredit their own organization than anybody else. Fine, spew your racism. And as more people heard this and saw it, they thought, this is ridiculous.
Right.
Who are these clowns hiding in their stupid white hoods? And I think that's part of what Jefferson is talking about, where reason is free to combat errors, and racism is an error, it's an erroneous opinion. So long as reason and speech is free to combat it, then we can put up with mistaken ideas, with bad opinions, including ugly speech and stupid speech and that kind of thing.
Now, I'm going to take this a step further. I'm going to venture a guess that I think I know what one of your other topics is further down the line. I don't know where it is on your list. I haven't seen this list, and I can't read your writing upside down. So I have no idea.
I can barely read it right side up.
So I have no idea if it's on this list, but I'm going to venture a guess.
Okay.
I'm going to venture a guess that private property is on your list because I know that was important to Jefferson.
It's the next one. And in fact, I'm looking at the clock. We're going to do a little bit of a lightning rounds here. We're going to do a few lightning rounds. So
let me talk about private property. Let me just jump into to why it's not.
Is it a white idea?
It is not a white idea, and here's why. If you have free speech and people start to tell you who they are, you should have the ability to say, I know who you really are, and I don't want you in my house or my business. I don't care if you are black or brown or Jewish or anything else, and you own a business, you own a home, and that person has said some things that you think that's a bad person.
Hold on, Dave. This is crazy what you're talking about. Let's say a black woman owns a bake shop.
Right.
She bought the building with her money. She saved up. She bought the ovens and the flour and the eggs and the cream and the sugar and whatever else you need to make a bake shop go. And a Klansman, a racist Klansman, goes and says, You are going to bake a cake for me, and you're going to put the Ku Klux Klan or a Nazi swastika or something like that on there, or white supremacy. We want that on the cake. You have this cake shop. I want to buy that cake from you. You're saying this radical thing that black woman could say, no, I don't want to make a cake for you. Go somewhere else.
Not only do I think she should be able to say it, I think she has to be able to say it. I think she must have
that
the right
freedom
to say that.
Yeah.
Because that is the opportunity to start to show somebody those beliefs aren't welcome. You can go hide in your little corner, but if you want to be a productive, happy, healthy member of society, you better start rethinking what you're thinking about, because we don't want that.
Let me challenge you just a little bit on this. The progressives have been arguing for a long time. Property rights only matter for wealthy people, for people who have property. People with lots of property care about property rights because they have their big mansion and their fancy cars and all this property they want protected. But if you're a poor black person living in some urban squalor, you don't care about property rights because you don't have any property. Isn't property just a tool for the rich to stay rich and for the poor to stay poor?
Absolutely not. The entire idea of property is property begets more property. Assets beget more assets. You can use the property you develop to get to the next stage, to get to the next stage, to get to the next stage. And if you go back to Charlemagne, like we were talking about earlier, the Jews were not allowed property rights. Actually, go back further. It was under the barbarians. When the barbarians removed the Romans from the Germanic lands, and all of a sudden they had no property rights. The Jews were no longer slaves, but they didn't have property rights. They had no ability to grow anything, to have food. They had no ability to build a house, to have shelter.
They physically could do it.
But it
was going to be taken away.
They were not allowed to keep it. So without property rights, but having those property rights, they were able to do things of value that could then be provided to somebody else and then be provided to somebody else. I know we're going quick, but property rights also ideas and your mind. And the minute you start to say you don't have a right to your own ideas, then you have no chance of getting to that next level. That's an asset. That is a quality. That is a capability that can take you from point A to point B and help you continue to build assets and continue to build wealth and property.
So you're suggesting that property rights are actually more important for poor people in a way, because as long as a poor person can keep whatever is his, including his own ideas and his labor and anything that he creates and produces, anything he earns, anything he trades with someone else, that he can build up his own personal wealth by creating value for others.
Yep.
Property rights helps poor people. I want to add in here just an important note. The grossest form of violation of, well, maybe murder is. Murder, in a way, is the ultimate violation of someone else's property rights, because their own life is theirs. It belongs to them. And the murderer takes that precious thing, their life. Just short of that, another gross, heinous violation of property is slavery, claiming ownership in another human being. And when we look at the history of race-based slavery, that takes us to the story of the African slave trade, where Africans with dark black skin were sold as slaves and then sent to various parts of the world where people looked different. There was the first time where you had human beings with very different physical features, some living freely and some living as slaves. And of the 12.5 million human beings, 12.5 million Africans who were sold into slavery and sent on ships around the world, every single one of them was a slave while standing on African soil.
Right.
Before they ever left Africa, that's why they boarded a slave ship, because someone had kidnapped them, tied up their hands and feet, and was basically stealing their liberty.
Yep.
That terrible story of the Atlantic slave trade is a gross violation of property rights.
And just to wrap that up, this is one of those ideas that is very black and white. You cannot, under any circumstances, say, here's the spectrum of property rights, and we're going to say you have property rights up until this point.
Right.
Because there's no principle, there's no way of controlling, of deciding reasonably where should that line be. You either have property rights or you don't.
If I have a rightful claim to 10% of your property, well, then why don't I also have a rightful claim to 15% or 20% or 50%, right? All the way up to 100%.
It's the same. We're talking about in our chapter meetings right now the minimum wage.
That's
and
right.
It's the same argument, right?
That's right.
If the minimum wage, if we should have a minimum wage and it should be $15, why shouldn't it be $25 or $35 or $100 or $150 or $250
Because
an
in
hour?
the minimum wage scenario, if you're the business owner and I'm government, I'm basically commandeering your property. I'm saying you are going to pay this employee over here a certain dollar amount. I'm telling you what you must do with your property. If I can tell you you must take $15 and pay someone each hour, why can't I tell you to pay him $25 or $100 or $1 million?
There's no principle under which you can do
All
that.
right, really fast lightning rounds here for the last three. These are three key ideas for Thomas Jefferson. The combination of majority rule, if you're going to have any kind of self-governing, Democratic or Republican kind of regime, you're going to have elections, and elections typically mean whoever's in the majority is going to rule, but you have to combine that with minority rights. So have elections, have majority rule. This is Jefferson's idea. Have majority rule. He said in that first inaugural address that I referenced before, in all cases, the majority is to rule, but, he qualified it, the majority must be reasonable. The minority possess their equal rights, which equal laws must protect. So he's saying there's a limit on the majority rule. The majority doesn't get to do anything they want to do to the minority. They can make key decisions like who's going to be the next president or who's going to be the next member of Congress. But whatever we do, the rights of all citizens must be protected, even those in a numerical minority. Is that a white idea?
No, I mean, it's as defined in the Constitution, right? The Constitution limits what those are. In the interest of time, I'll just tell people go back and watch our case study on mob rule.
Yeah, that's right.
And you'll get a really good deep dive on that whole idea.
Here's number 6. I'm going to get us through all seven.
I didn't think it was going to be
topics.
possible.
Number 6. Key idea for Thomas Jefferson, no titles of nobility. The idea that nobody here in the United States, just because you come from a certain bloodline, just because of who your parents or grandparents or great-great-parents were, that doesn't give you some title of political authority to rule over other people. No lords, dukes, barons, kings, pharaohs, Caesars, none of that in this country. No titles of nobility. Is that a white idea?
No. And it would be like saying white is a title of nobility, right?
I think many woke progressives probably would say that, having white skin is some title of nobility.
And Jefferson absolutely dismissed that in saying no titles of nobility.
That's right.
That no person, that is how we are all created equal. That is the very foundation of equality in this country.
Which means I'm a guy who has pasty white skin. My pasty white skin gives me no rightful authority to command another human being, even someone with different color skin, or to take someone else's property. None at all. If I want to be in any position of any political power, the only rightful way I can do it is to gather the consent of my fellow citizens, get elected to it. And even then, the Constitution limits what I can do in an elected position of power.
Being an elected official is certainly not a title of nobility.
Right.
You are an elected servant, not an elected noble.
One of the beautiful features of the United States Constitution, the Constitution enshrines Jefferson's idea into the text of the original Constitution. No titles of nobility are recognized under law, under the Constitution. All right, last one. This is sort of a big one that kind of encapsulates all the things we've been talking about. This notion of Jefferson's idea of individual, unalienable, natural rights. Includes things like your life, your liberty, your private property, the freedom to pursue happiness. He's saying you and every other human being, including every black human being, every brown human being, every slave has a rightful claim to their own person, their own property, their own liberty, and therefore things like slavery and murder and theft are wrong because every human being has an individual natural right. And those natural rights, they don't come from laws. They also don't depend on being a member of a group. It's an individual. If you're a human being, he says you have the same natural rights as all other human beings do. Is that a white idea?
It's the exact opposite. It is the very foundation of what makes this country so special for all people. The idea that we all have equal individual natural rights, and this is something, and I say this over and over and over and over again, and I'm not going to get into the whole argument again, but minority communities need to stop asking the government to give them, to grant them rights. They already have them.
Yeah.
The recognition of equal individual natural rights.
I'm going to add on to that. So should people in majority communities. It doesn't matter if you're a member of a majority or a member of a minority. Stop asking for special perks and favors from government.
Well, I'm not even getting there. I'm just saying your basic foundation to the right to private property, your right to your own life, to your own body, to your own ideas, your right to your own religious liberty, your right, all of those natural rights that we built into the framework of this country. Nobody has to give those to you.
Right.
Those did not come strictly because Thomas Jefferson or George Washington said so. You don't like
they probably came from Anthony Fauci. Didn't he give those to us?
I think he is that old. I think he has been around that long. Did he make that much? Was he the highest paid government official in 1776 also?
Probably.
Stop thinking that you're waiting for government to give those to you. You don't have to like George Washington. You don't have to like Thomas Jefferson. You don't have to like John Adams or any of those guys, because guess what? They didn't give you these rights either. They didn't give white people those rights. They didn't give black or brown people those rights. They didn't give Asian people those rights or Jewish people those rights. Those rights existed.
And here's the real kicker that we're going to wrap up with. This notion of universal individual natural rights that all human beings have. It is the premise. It is the foundation. It's the moral foundation for every wrong that woke progressives complain about. When woke progressives push back, they say racism is wrong, structural racism is wrong, racial injustice is wrong. That raises a very obvious question. Why? Why is racial injustice wrong. And the answer, the only principled, consistent answer is that all men are created equal in the sense they all have the same individual natural rights. And that's why it's wrong. It's wrong for a white man to enslave a black man. It's wrong for a black man to enslave a black man. It's wrong for a black man to enslave a white man. It's wrong for any human being to enslave another human being or to steal that human being's liberty or property or life. The principles of Jefferson that we're talking about here on his birthday, the principles of Jefferson are the principles of moral reality, and they're what allow us to see wrongs as wrongs. Thank you, Thomas Jefferson.
These founders were pretty smart.
They were pretty smart.
They saw a lot of this coming, and if we could just go back and study and understand them, we could live in a much better country. We wouldn't be rioting. We wouldn't have a lot of the problems we have today.
That means we need guardians of the American idea, and that's what we do with the Vino Veritas Society.
Nos somos custodes.